The billionaire CEO who slapped an old airport janitor had no idea the entire international flight would soon be delayed because of him. At 2 in the morning, the international terminal still pulsed with life. Rolling suitcases echoed endlessly across polished marble floors, while tired travelers drifted beneath the bright white airport lights, carrying coffee cups, passports, and expensive luggage. Businessmen rushed through security, while flight attendants crossed the terminal preparing for overnight departures. Nobody paid attention to the old janitor slowly pushing a worn cleaning cart near Gate 17. His name was Nani. His faded blue uniform looked washed out from years of hard work, and the exhaustion in his eyes made him appear older than he truly was. One wheel on his cleaning cart squeaked softly every few seconds, but even that tiny sound disappeared beneath the noise of the crowded airport. To everyone around him, Nani was invisible. Some passengers stepped over the freshly cleaned floor without noticing him. Others left trash behind without apology. Nobody cared who stayed behind every night cleaning the mess after thousands of strangers. Nani never complained. He simply lowered his eyes, cleaned the floor, and quietly kept moving forward. For years, this had become Nani's entire life. Working exhausting night shifts, surviving on very little sleep, and saving every dollar he earned just to support his daughter Misa, there was nothing glamorous about his existence. After work, he returned to a tiny apartment with peeling paint on the walls and old furniture that had clearly survived too many difficult years. Sometimes he skipped meals so Misa could have better school supplies. Sometimes he pretended not to be tired so she would not worry. Despite everything life had taken from him, Nani still carried himself with quiet dignity. There was something calm about him that felt unusual, as if he had once belonged somewhere much greater before disappearing into this invisible life inside the airport. Near the large airport windows overlooking the runway lights, Nani paused for a moment and answered a video call from Misa. The moment her small face appeared on the screen, the exhaustion in his expression softened immediately. Misa sat at the kitchen table inside their apartment, surrounded by homework papers and schoolbooks. Despite the late hour, she smiled warmly the second she saw her father. "Dad, are you still working?" she asked softly. Nani smiled gently. "Just a little longer." Misa frowned slightly. "Did you eat dinner yet?" Nani hesitated for half a second, which immediately gave him away. Misa sighed. "You forgot again." Nani chuckled quietly before promising he would eat soon. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other through the phone screen while the noise of the airport continued around him. Then Misa looked down nervously before admitting that several girls at school laughed at her earlier after discovering her father worked as a janitor. The words hit Nani harder than he allowed himself to show. Nani slowly turned toward the runway lights outside the window before speaking calmly. "There is no shame in honest work," he said softly. Misa nodded, but sadness still lingered in her eyes. "I know. I just wish people could see you the way I do." Those words stayed in Nani's chest long after she said them, because once, many years ago, people had seen him very differently. Once, important people respected him. Once, pilots trusted his judgment with their lives. Once, engineers listened whenever he spoke. But all of that disappeared after the death of his wife. And after losing her, Nani walked away from everything and buried his old life completely. Now, the only thing that mattered to him was raising Misa peacefully. Before ending the call, Misa told him she planned to come wait for him near the airport entrance after finishing homework because she did not want him walking home alone so late at night. For the first time that night, Nani laughed softly. Despite all the pain in his life, his daughter was still the reason he kept going. A few minutes later, the atmosphere inside the terminal suddenly changed. Employees straightened their posture, while security guards became alert almost instantly. The sharp sound of expensive high heels echoed across the polished marble floor as Eva entered the airport, surrounded by assistants and bodyguards. She wore a perfectly tailored black suit and carried herself with cold confidence that made people instinctively move aside. Eva was one of the most powerful CEOs in the aviation industry, known for building billion-dollar companies and destroying competitors without hesitation. Investors admired her intelligence, while employees feared disappointing her. Tonight, she was preparing to board an important international flight connected to the largest business deal of her career. Every minute mattered to her. Every delay irritated her. While assistants updated her schedule and security cleared her path through the terminal, Nani quietly continued cleaning nearby without looking at her twice. To Eva, he was nothing more than another invisible airport worker. Then suddenly, everything changed. A little boy chasing a toy airplane broke away from his mother and ran across the slippery terminal floor directly into the path of a heavy luggage cart rolling out of control. People screamed. The child froze in fear. Without hesitation, Nani dropped his mop and rushed forward faster than anyone expected from a tired old janitor. He grabbed the boy and pulled him away barely seconds before the luggage cart slammed violently into nearby seats. The child was safe, but as Nani turned, his shoulder accidentally bumped into one of Eva's assistants carrying a hot cup of coffee. The coffee spilled across the front of Eva's expensive black suit. Silence immediately spread across the terminal. Eva slowly looked down at the stain on her jacket before raising her cold eyes toward Nani. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" she demanded. Nani apologized calmly and explained that he had only been trying to save the child, but Eva was too angry to listen. In front of hundreds of passengers, she mocked his appearance, his uniform, and his status. "This suit costs more than your yearly salary," she snapped loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. Several passengers slowed down to watch, while others quietly raised their phones to record the scene. The little boy's mother tried to defend Nani, explaining that he had saved her son's life, but Eva silenced her immediately. Nani never argued back. He simply stood there quietly, apologizing again in a calm voice. Somehow, his silence only made Eva even angrier. Before anyone expected it, Eva slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed sharply through the crowded terminal. Several passengers gasped, while others whispered nervously. A few people even laughed awkwardly while recording with their phones. Nani's head turned slightly from the impact, but he never raised his voice. He simply stood there quietly. And then he noticed Misa standing near one of the terminal columns, with her backpack hanging from one shoulder. She had arrived just in time to witness everything: the insults, the humiliation, and the slap. Tears immediately filled her eyes. For the first time that night, genuine pain crossed Nani's face. Not because Eva hit him, but because his daughter saw it happen. Without saying another word, Nani slowly bent down and picked up the mop from the floor. His movements remained calm and controlled, despite the humiliation. Eva adjusted her damaged suit and coldly told him to remember his place. Nani looked at her quietly for several long seconds before answering in a calm voice that somehow made the silence feel heavier. "I know my place," he said softly. Then he gently placed a hand on Misa's shoulder and quietly walked away with his cleaning cart, while strangers continued whispering behind them. To most people inside the airport, it was already becoming nothing more than a short moment of public drama. None of them realized that less than 20 minutes later, the entire airport would begin desperately searching for the old janitor everyone had ignored. Inside the cockpit of the aircraft parked at Gate 17, Captain Andiu calmly continued his final pre-flight checks while passengers waited near the boarding area outside. The cabin crew prepared documents, ground staff loaded the final luggage containers beneath the aircraft, and airport workers moved across the runway under flashing lights. Everything appeared normal. Then suddenly, one small warning light blinked red across the navigation panel. At first, Andy assumed it was a minor sensor delay. He pressed several commands to refresh the system, expecting the error to disappear within seconds. Instead, another warning appeared beneath the first one. His expression slowly changed. The cockpit grew quieter. Beside him, the co-pilot stared at the display with growing concern as additional warning messages began appearing one after another across the guidance system. "Captain, that wasn't there earlier," the co-pilot whispered nervously. Andy leaned closer toward the monitors, carefully studying the data, while the aircraft systems rejected every reset command they attempted. Within minutes, the calm atmosphere inside the cockpit disappeared completely. Warning alarms echoed through the flight deck, while the navigation systems repeatedly failed synchronization checks. The aircraft's primary guidance controls began rejecting backup commands, and even the emergency override systems refused to initialize properly. Andy immediately grabbed the radio and contacted ground operations. Flight 729 requesting urgent technical support at Gate 17, he said calmly, though the tension in his voice was impossible to hide completely. Nearby ground engineers quickly received the alert and rushed toward the operations center beneath the terminal. Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, passengers waiting near the boarding gate still had no idea anything serious was happening. Eva stood near the front of the premium boarding line, impatiently checking messages on her phone, while assistants surrounded her discussing schedules and overseas meetings. Then, the boarding screen suddenly changed. Boarding delayed. Confused murmurs immediately spread across the terminal. Several passengers sighed loudly, while others began asking gate employees questions. Eva slowly lowered her phone after noticing the updated status on the screen. Her expression hardened instantly. "What does delayed mean?" she demanded sharply. The young gate employee standing nearby nervously explained that engineers were investigating a technical issue with the aircraft systems. Eva's frustration exploded almost immediately. "I have investors waiting overseas," she snapped loudly. "That meeting cannot be postponed because of some technical inconvenience." The employee apologized politely and explained that safety procedures required full system clearance before departure, but Eva barely listened. To her, delays represented weakness, inefficiency, and loss of control, three things she hated more than anything. Deep beneath the terminal inside the airport operations center, engineers crowded around glowing monitors while warning messages continued flashing across multiple system screens. Tension filled the room. Technicians argued over possible causes while maintenance crews desperately attempted to reset the aircraft systems remotely. "Run the backup alignment again," one engineer shouted. "Already failed," another replied immediately. "Then isolate the navigation chain." "We tried. The system keeps locking itself." Warning alarms continued echoing through the room as panic slowly spread among the younger technicians. This was no ordinary malfunction. The aircraft systems behaved as if something deep inside the guidance network was intentionally blocking every correction attempt. Every reset command failed. Every override was rejected. Sweat formed across several engineers' foreheads as departure schedules across the airport slowly collapsed around them. Then Adam entered the operations center. Unlike the younger engineers rushing around him, he moved calmly. His grey hair and tired eyes reflected decades of experience dealing with aviation emergencies. Everyone inside the room immediately quieted slightly when they saw him approach the monitors. Adam carefully reviewed the diagnostics without speaking, while the younger engineers nervously explained the situation. "The guidance controls are unstable," one technician reported quickly. "Backup synchronization keeps failing." Another added, "The system rejects every manual reset command." Adam narrowed his eyes while studying the warning logs. "That aircraft passed inspection earlier tonight," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," one engineer answered. "Then something changed after inspection." Nobody responded. The silence itself made the room feel even heavier. Adam slowly scrolled through the system logs until his attention suddenly stopped on something unusual. Beside one printed diagnostic sheet was a small handwritten technical note scribbled near the bottom corner of the page. Most people inside the room had ignored it completely because it looked insignificant, just a few numbers, a short calculation, and a strange symbol written quickly beside a system warning code. But the second Adam saw the symbol, his entire expression changed. His hand froze above the paper. For a moment, he looked like a man staring directly into the past. One of the younger engineers noticed immediately. "Sir?" Adam slowly picked up the diagnostic sheet with trembling fingers. The strange handwritten symbol meant nothing to anyone else inside the room, but Adam recognized it instantly. 15 years earlier, only one engineer in the entire aviation industry used that exact notation style during emergency diagnostics, Nani. Memories immediately flooded back into Adam's mind. Impossible aircraft failures, emergency simulations, long nights inside engineering labs, and one quiet genius, calmly solving problems nobody else could understand. Adam remembered watching Nani save hundreds of lives during a catastrophic systems failure years ago, while every other engineer stood helplessly around him. He remembered the same handwriting, the same unusual symbols, the same calm brilliance hidden behind complete silence. Adam slowly looked up from the paper. "Who was near this aircraft after inspection?" he asked quietly. One technician searched the logs nervously. "Only maintenance crews and cleaning staff." Adam's voice sharpened instantly. "Which cleaning staff?" Another worker hesitated before answering. "The old janitor from the terminal. Nani, I think." The operations center became completely silent. Several engineers exchanged confused looks while Adam slowly lowered the paper back onto the table. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Adam finally whispered something that made the younger technicians stare at him in disbelief. "My God," one engineer frowned. "Sir, do you know him?" Adam looked directly toward the glowing warning monitors before answering. "Know him?" he repeated quietly. "That man designed half the emergency stabilization systems modern aircraft still use today. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed properly. The idea sounded impossible. The tired janitor cleaning floors upstairs could not possibly be the same legendary engineer older aviation experts still talked about in training seminars and emergency case studies. At that exact moment, Eva stormed into the operations room, demanding answers. "Why is my plane still delayed?" she snapped angrily. "I want this fixed immediately." But nobody answered her right away. Adam slowly turned toward her, holding the diagnostic sheet in his hands. "Your aircraft is still on the ground because somebody discovered a dangerous systems fault before takeoff," he explained calmly. Eva crossed her arms impatiently. "Then repair it." Adam stared directly into her eyes for several long seconds before speaking again. "We can't." Eva looked stunned. "You have an entire engineering department standing here, and nobody can fix one aircraft." Adam's voice became quieter. "There may be one person who can." Eva frowned impatiently. "Then call him." Adam slowly looked down at the handwritten symbol again before answering. "We're trying." "Who is he?" Eva demanded. Adam finally lifted his eyes toward her. "The man you slapped 20 minutes ago." Eva stared at Adam in complete disbelief, convinced she had either misunderstood him or walked into some kind of absurd joke. The cold confidence she carried everywhere with her suddenly weakened for the first time that night. "The janitor?" she repeated slowly, almost laughing from confusion. You're telling me a cleaning worker is somehow important to this aircraft? Nobody inside the operations room answered immediately. The silence itself became uncomfortable. Warning alarms continued flashing red across the monitors, while engineers stood frozen around their stations, too nervous to interrupt the growing tension between Eva and Adam. Finally, Adam placed the diagnostic sheet carefully on the table and pointed toward the strange handwritten symbol near the bottom of the page. 15 years ago, he began quietly. During one of the worst aviation emergencies this country has ever seen, an engineer discovered a fatal stabilization error minutes before takeoff. Every system failed. Every backup collapsed. People panicked. But one man stayed calm and rewrote the emergency sequence by hand, while hundreds of lives depended on him. Adam slowly lifted his eyes toward Eva. That man was Nani. The room became completely silent again. Eva looked around at the engineers standing nearby, waiting for someone to deny the story, but nobody spoke. Several older technicians looked genuinely shaken. One younger engineer quietly whispered Nani's name under his breath, as if finally recognizing it from old aviation training manuals. Adam continued speaking while staring directly at the system monitors. After the accident that killed his wife, Nani disappeared. Nobody knew where he went. People assumed he retired or died. But tonight, Adam looked toward the diagnostic sheet again. He recognized a fault inside your aircraft before any of us did. Eva's expression slowly changed from disbelief into something much more uncomfortable. Guilt. She remembered the calmness in Nani's eyes while she screamed at him. She remembered the little girl standing there crying beside him. Most of all, she remembered the way he never once defended himself. Before she could say another word, one of the engineers suddenly shouted from across the room, "Captain Andiu is requesting immediate status confirmation." Adam hurried toward the communication console while another warning message flashed violently across the main screen. System synchronization unstable. Several engineers immediately rushed back to their stations. Panic returned to the room almost instantly. "Navigation controls are degrading further," one technician yelled. "Backup alignment just failed again," another shouted. "If the stabilization lock spreads into the guidance chain, we lose departure clearance completely." Eva watched the chaos unfold around her, while the reality of the situation finally began sinking in. This was no minor delay anymore. The aircraft genuinely could not fly. Seconds later, Captain Andiu himself entered the operations room, still wearing his pilot uniform. Unlike the nervous engineers around him, his face remained calm, but the seriousness in his eyes immediately silenced everyone nearby. "Status?" he asked sharply. Adam shook his head once. No progress. Andiu glanced at the flashing warning monitors before quietly asking the question nobody else wanted to say out loud. "Where is Nani?" Nobody answered. Adam looked frustrated. "Security teams are still searching the terminal." Andiu's jaw tightened slightly before he turned toward Eva. "Then the aircraft stays grounded." Eva immediately stepped forward. "Captain, do you understand how important this flight is?" Andiu calmly looked back at her. "Do you understand how dangerous this malfunction is?" Eva opened her mouth to argue again, but Andiu interrupted before she could speak. "I've flown aircraft for nearly 30 years, he said quietly, "and I only know one person capable of identifying faults like this before they become disasters." He paused briefly. "That person is Nani." For the first time in years, Eva felt completely powerless. All the money, authority, and influence she carried meant absolutely nothing against a broken aircraft sitting motionless on the runway. The realization hit her harder than she expected. 20 minutes earlier, she treated Nani like he was worthless. Now, the entire airport depended on him. Outside in the terminal, confusion spread among passengers as departure announcements continued getting delayed. Rumors moved quickly through the crowded boarding area. Some passengers complained loudly about refunds and missed connections, while others searched online for updates. Meanwhile, security officers and airport employees hurried through terminals, calling Nani's name over radios. Several workers who witnessed the earlier confrontation began whispering uncomfortably after learning who Nani really was. Suddenly, the old janitor nobody respected had become the most important man in the airport. Outside near the employee parking lot, the noise of the terminal felt far away. Nani sat quietly beside Misa beneath a dim overhead light, while eating a cold box dinner from the employee cafeteria. Misa sat close beside him, holding her backpack tightly against her chest. Neither of them spoke much. The humiliation inside the terminal still hung heavily between them. After several long minutes, Misa finally looked up at her father. "Dad," she said softly. Nani glanced toward her. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, while carefully looking at the faint red mark remaining on his cheek. Nani gave a small smile. "I've had worse." Misa lowered her eyes again. "I hated seeing them laugh at you." For a moment, Nani stayed silent before quietly answering. "People often laugh at things they do not understand." Misa looked confused. "Then why didn't you tell them who you really are?" The question lingered in the cold night air between them. Nani slowly stared toward the runway lights, glowing in the distance. Dozens of memories moved silently behind his tired eyes. Aircraft alarms, emergency simulations, control rooms filled with panic, reporters, investigations, funerals, and finally the hospital room where he lost his wife forever. After that day, none of the awards or recognition mattered anymore. He no longer wanted people to know his name. He only wanted peace. "Because none of that matters now," he finally answered softly. Misa looked unconvinced. "It matters to me." Nani smiled faintly and gently placed one hand on her head. Before he could respond, hurried footsteps suddenly approached from across the parking lot. Adam appeared moments later, breathing heavily after searching the airport for nearly 15 minutes. The second he saw Nani sitting there beside Misa, visible relief flooded across his exhausted face. "Thank God," he muttered under his breath before quickly walking closer. Nani immediately recognized him. "Adam," he said calmly, sounding more surprised than nervous. Adam stopped directly in front of him, struggling to catch his breath. "We need you back inside. Now." Nani's expression barely changed. "What happened?" Adam looked at him with complete seriousness. "Flight 729 has a guidance failure. We cannot stabilize the navigation system." Nani immediately understood the severity just from hearing the words. "What error sequence?" Adam handed him the printed diagnostic sheet. Nani studied it silently for several seconds. The moment his eyes landed on the system code, his expression shifted slightly. "How long has it been unstable?" 23 minutes. Nani slowly stood up. "Why didn't they ground the aircraft immediately?" Adam almost laughed from stress. "Because nobody understood what they were looking at until I found your notation." Misa looked back and forth between both men in confusion. "Dad, what's happening?" Nani looked toward her gently. "I need to help them for a little while." Misa hesitated before quietly asking the question both of them already understood. "The same people who hurt you?" Nani looked down at his daughter for several long seconds before calmly answering in the same quiet voice he always used. "People are still on that aircraft." Adam watched Nani carefully, expecting him to refuse after everything that happened earlier that night. After being humiliated in front of hundreds of strangers, nobody would have blamed him for walking away. But Nani simply handed his unfinished dinner to Misa and quietly said, "Stay close to Adam until I come back." Misa grabbed his sleeve gently and asked why he still wanted to help people who treated him so badly. Nani looked at her calmly before answering, "Doing the right thing should never depend on how people treat us." When Nani returned to the operations center, the entire room fell silent. Engineers immediately stepped aside, while warning alarms continued flashing across the monitors. Eva stood frozen near the control station, unable to believe the quiet janitor she slapped earlier was now the person everyone depended on. Nani ignored the tension around him and calmly studied the aircraft diagnostics. After only a few moments, he immediately identified the real source of the malfunction, while younger engineers watched in disbelief. His hands moved confidently across the controls as hidden system errors appeared on the screens one after another. Captain Andiu soon entered the room and stopped the moment he saw Nani. With emotion in his voice, he revealed that many years ago, Nani had saved his life during a catastrophic in-flight systems failure that should have killed everyone on board. The room became completely silent as the truth finally sank in. The old janitor everyone ignored was once one of the greatest aviation safety engineers in the industry. While everyone watched nervously, Nani calmly entered several final commands into the system. For one tense second, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the warning alarms disappeared. One by one, the monitors turned green as the aircraft systems stabilized completely. Nobody could believe it. Eva slowly walked toward Nani, her confidence completely gone. Tears filled her eyes as she apologized for humiliating him in front of the entire airport. Nani stayed quiet for a moment before softly looking toward Misa and saying, "My daughter saw everything." Those 4 words hit harder than any anger ever could. Because for the first time that night, Eva finally understood that the deepest wound was never the slap itself. It was forcing a little girl to watch her father be treated like he was worthless. Sometimes life has a strange way of hiding the most extraordinary people behind the most ordinary faces. In a world where everyone rushes to judge others by their clothes, their jobs, or the amount of money in their bank account, people like Nani often become invisible. Passengers walked past him every night without learning his name. They saw an old janitor pushing a cleaning cart and assumed they understood his entire story. They never imagined the quiet man cleaning their messes had once carried the responsibility of hundreds of lives in his hands. They never imagined that behind the tired eyes and worn uniform was a man who had already sacrificed more than most people could ever understand. But maybe that is the tragedy of the modern world. People have become so obsessed with power, titles, and appearances that they forget true character often lives in silence. Real strength does not always stand on stages or sit inside luxury offices. Sometimes it works late at night when nobody is watching. Sometimes it hides its pain behind a tired smile, so a child does not have to worry. Sometimes it continues helping others, even after being humiliated, ignored, and treated unfairly. Nani never tried to prove he was important. He never demanded respect. Even after Eva slapped him in front of hundreds of strangers, he still chose to save the aircraft because innocent people were on board. That is what separated him from everyone else inside that airport. While others valued status, ego, and pride, Nani valued human lives. And in the end, that quiet humanity became greater than all the money and authority surrounding him. For Eva, that night became more than just a delayed flight. It became the moment she realized how dangerous it is to judge someone by their appearance. She spent years believing powerful people looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, and lived above ordinary workers. But one exhausted janitor quietly shattered everything she thought she understood about success, dignity, and worth. And maybe that lesson matters far beyond this story, because somewhere in the real world tonight, there are still people like Nani walking through crowded places completely unnoticed, fathers sacrificing silently for their children, workers carrying invisible pain while still choosing kindness. People who may never receive applause for the burdens they carry every single day. And yet, without them, the world itself would quietly fall apart. So before judging someone for their job, their appearance, or their struggles, remember this story. Remember that greatness is not always loud. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones standing quietly in the background while everyone else looks the other way. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. For more emotional stories about hidden heroes, second chances, sacrifice, kindness, and the quiet people the world too often overlooks. Because sometimes, the people society sees as the smallest are actually the ones holding everything together.
Thank you for watching my video.